time, the native Taiwanese began to consider themselves as separate from Japanese, separate from Chinese, but to call themselves Taiwanese. What ensues, of course, is that Chiang Kai-shek eventually loses the mainland to Mao Zedong and communists, and he arrives in Taiwan and establishes the Republic of China in Taiwan, which is still to this day Taiwan's official name. And of course, Mao Zedong establishes the People's Republic of China. And in American history books, that's mostly what people focus on, is the nationalists versus the communists. What's often forgotten is the native Taiwanese story, those who had lived on the island, those who suffered under 228, and would suffer under the next 40 years in a period in Taiwan known as the White Terror period. The White Terror period is a period of martial law from 1949 to 1987. It's the longest period of martial law in the world. And it's during this time period that Chiang Kai-shek really solidifies his hold on Taiwan, is attempting to use it as a base to take back the mainland, which of course never happens. Now, this is an interesting quirk in history. Chiang Kai-shek's son, a guy named Chiang Jin-kuo, we call him CCK for short. CCK was born in China, and his father sent him to Russia to study. In Russia, he became a communist, and he renounced his father. He married a Russian woman, and he decided to become Russian. After a while, he began to realize that as a Chinese person, he couldn't get very far in Russia. So he came back to China, he begged for his father's forgiveness. But he brought some things with him from Russia, one of which was an extensive spy system, the Stalinist system of spying on your neighbors. And he brought that to Taiwan. And during this period of martial law, the White Terror period, many Taiwanese fled Taiwan to the United States, to Japan, to Europe, to get away from the martial law. And they wanted to call themselves Taiwanese. What CCK did was he created a student spy system so that students from Taiwan could be hired, could be basically given scholarships to go study in the United States, but their job on top for getting the scholarship was to spy on other students. And that's where I knew I had my hook to make this movie. Because I want to tell a movie, I want to tell a story that was American-based, that was based here in the United States for an American audience. And so, I knew that this happened because my parents were spied upon. My parents were put on a blacklist of other students who called themselves Taiwanese rather than Chinese. And when my parents went back to Taiwan, they were harassed and they were followed. But they were lucky because many of their friends suffered much worse harassment. Some were jailed, some were tortured, and in a couple high-profile cases, there were murders. And it was those murders that I began to research and use as the basis for the film, Formosa Betrayal. So about 5 years ago, I began to do some heavy-duty research on this time period and subject matter, and I came up with a storyline. That storyline was basically about an American FBI detective in the early 1980s who's investigating the murder of a Taiwanese professor at a small Midwestern studio. It turns out this professor's been spied upon by his own students, and those students are being hired by the government of Taiwan. Through a series of events, he chases the killers to Taiwan. He finds out that the killers are Chinese mafia hired by the government to kill political dissidents in the United States. That it goes to the top of the government in Taiwan, and that the US government knows about this, but doesn't want to do anything because of the US-Taiwan-China relationship. Now, there are some of you in this room who know that everything I just said is actually true, that all those events actually did occur. What is not true, what is fictional, is the way we outline the events, the way we, all the characters in the movie are fictional creations, because I wanted to make a feature film. Many people ask why we didn't make a documentary of this subject. And our feeling was there are a number of documentaries on this subject, particularly in Taiwan. But we wanted to tell, once again, a feature film, a fictional film for Americans and the rest of the world to understand exactly what happened in Taiwan during this period. So with that idea, I began to put together, the company Formosa Films, and I began to hire writers and hire crew members and various people. And in the meantime, I began to go around the country raising funds for the film. Now, basically, when we were doing the fundraising, we didn't show anyone a script. We didn't show anyone. We told them who was involved. We showed them how we're doing it. But basically, we went around primarily to Taiwanese Americans and asked them. We gave them basically the storyline and said, "This is what we want to do. This is how we want to do it. And this is where we want to go with it." And the Taiwanese community has rallied around this project in a way that's pretty much unprecedented. We were able to raise over $6 million just within the community for this project. And then after that, we had an investment bank named Berthel Fisher Financial Services based in Iowa that came in to raise the finishing funds. And so with that monies, we went and we produced the film. We started shooting in April 2008 in Chicago for the American portion of the film, and then we made a decision that's turning out to be quite controversial, but I'll explain it. Which is that we decided to shoot rather than in Taiwan for the Taiwan portion. We decided to shoot in Bangkok, Thailand, for Taiwan. Now, there are several reasons we did this. First of all, if anyone has been to Taiwan within the last 25 years, they know that Taiwan has changed so much in the last 25 years. It's almost impossible to find locations in Taiwan that look like it did in 1983. So we actually found it easier to recreate 1983 Taiwan in Bangkok, in Thailand, rather than doing it in Taiwan. The second reason we did it was budgetary. It was a lot cheaper, frankly, to shoot in Thailand than it was in Taiwan. Taiwan, unfortunately, right now does not have a very strong film industry, and we were told we'd be the biggest film on the island. And we would have to import our equipment from Japan, possibly from Hong Kong, possibly from Australia, which would have doubled or even tripled our costs. The last reason that we decided to shoot in Thailand instead of Taiwan was primarily political. This film, of course, deals with a very controversial subject matter in Taiwan, and there was actually a change in administration literally as we were shooting the film. And we felt, for the safety of the crew, for all sorts of reasons, we thought it was better for us to shoot it elsewhere. And I think it turned out to be, I personally believe it turned out to be a very good decision. You're free to disagree with that. but like I said, we never intended to make a documentary. This was very much intended to be a feature. Let me talk a little bit about who we got to make the film. Because in a lot of ways, the people involved in the film is a veritable who's who of Hollywood. Our director was a man by the name of Adam Kane. Adam was a cinematographer, a cameraman, a director of photography for over 20 years. He shot the pilot of the TV series Heroes on NBC. And he won pretty much every award under the sun for that. He became a producer-director on the show Pushing Daisies, and has gone on to direct episodes of The Mentalist, and My Own Worst Enemy, and Kings, and many, many other television shows. And he turned out to be the perfect director for this because we shot this during what was the writer's strike in 2008. And at that time, all the television shows went dark. And so it was a perfect opportunity for us to pick him up and to use him. And he turned out to be an excellent choice. Our director of photography, our cinematographer, Erich Hardowitz, was Steven Spielberg's second unit photographer for many years. And he had just gotten done shooting Indiana Jones right before doing our film. Our costume designer, Karen Wagner, has worked on such movies as The Green Mile with Tom Hanks, The Notebook, The Majestic, huge movies, huge Hollywood movies. And she told me that the reason she decided to do a small movie like ours, Formosa Trade, is because she's Jewish. And when she read the script, she said she was on a plane between Israel and Germany. And she said she literally started to cry as she read the script because she felt a strong kinship as to the struggle of the Taiwanese people with the struggle of her own